you want to start with platform?
Yeah, I could speak a little bit to that. So PAC, we just put out an RC a couple days ago, and that's out there. We're planning to release sometime next week, so a little bit behind schedule, but yeah, we're making traction there.
The implementation team is hard at work on Platform 08 and Build Pack 07, which is mostly SBOM stuff.
I should probably add on the platform side, sorry, that we got a contribution for Tecton, where it's adding support for chains, which has to do with signing and co-sign integration. And we're basically doing all the legwork right now to see when we can release, but it seems like we might have something coming up in the near future.
Any other sub-team updates?
On the back team side, we released a new version of libcnb that has exec support, and we're planning on the next major version upgrade for libcnb. So there's a separate branch where we've been working with some of the folks over at Paketo to figure out a unified API so that they can reuse libcnb instead of packet potentially.
All right, any other updates? Distribution team, anything else? Seems like no, so we'll move along to our first RFC, 186. And that is Anthony's run image SBOM. Any comments on that this week?
Yes, thank you. So, I just wanted to reiterate, I believe our conversation last time, there were 3 big changes that came out of it. One, instead of putting the SBOM in /SBOM, right, the top level, we're putting it in CNB SBOM. Another change we decided on was we wanted labels explicitly for the stack SBOM, which the most pragmatic reason being for rebasing. It would be easy to just pull the SBOM layer on a rebase to basically, keep it up to date as opposed to doing some sort of weird searching. And then the last one was, I believe we said we'll keep merging out of scope, merging, Cyclone DX or Cyclone DX, or just merging anything at all. We'll keep it out of scope for this RFC. And I don't know, just defer that till later. If I'm missing anything else, I believe that was the outcome of the last conversation, and that's what I've updated the RFC with. And sorry, I wanted to say, sneaking in, just for parity with this new label for the stack, the build pack SBOMs, that the lifecycle rights would also have its own top level label. Sorry, now I'm done.
That's not part of this RSC, right? That's more or less an understanding for the spec.
I put it as part of this RSC.
You did put it as part of this RSC. I am curious, as far as the extension goes, I don't know if I recall there being a .json at the end. Is that true for the other SBOMs as well?
Well, that's certainly how it is in the original SBOM RFC.
I think they can also, or actually I forget, in the original RFC, do we support XML format in addition to JSON, or are we saying that we only support JSON formats?
We're saying only JSON. Oh, sorry.
Just JSON. No, but there's no restriction. Like that was the whole reason we had media types as one of the things that the build pack specifies. So if in the future we want to support XML, we can.
Got it. We specifically said just the media types that are plus JSON at the end for now, but we could add XML ones if we wanted to.
Yeah, we just take the media types as it is and try to match that to an extension. If the media type is like application / Cyclone DX plus XML, and that's allowed listed, then we would be able to do that. But yeah. I had some questions about like I didn't catch these like /CNB /SPOM stuff versus the top level SPOM.
Yeah. So the rationale was that, I believe it was just /SPOM doesn't really see like a CNB specific thing, right? This is a directory being added for a use case for CNB. So like this sort of identifies it as that.
Did we remove it from layers config SPOM to this? Like the original RFC was
Okay.
layers config SPOM, whatever, rather than a top level SPOM.
Okay, I'm sorry. Now I understand. That's a good question. So that one is staying under layers SPOM, right? This is a completely different SPOM, right? This is one made when the stack is made by the stock operator, right? And we said this last time, right? We don't want to put it in layers because by the time the platform does a build, right? Like I know, for instance, in Packet, that whole layer, that whole directory might get wiped away and recreated with a different user and things like that, right? So to keep it safe, right, the stack operator puts it in a completely different directory. Merging is not in scope, but if merging does need to happen, it will be put in a subsequent directory, maybe in the layers SPOM of the original RFC. Am I making sense?
Yeah, that was the only question I had. Like if like in the future we decide to merge things, where would that go?
Yes, it would go in a different, probably in the same layers directory, the layers SPOM directory, right? This was just for a source SPOM, a source stack form, right? This is no modification goes into this layer or directory.
I might suggest that if we support merging in the future, that we merge outside of the image, like we support pulling all the individual SBOMs, then merging into like a cosine image that like isn't part of it. That way you don't like have to duplicate all the entries, or whatever tool knows how to find the special label and go to the layer and download the FS layer that could also do the merge at the time. I don't think we have to decide this now. It's just like I don't see a super strong reason to perform the operation on top of the image at this point.
The other question I have is, what's the plan for compatibility with this SPOM location in the run image with the support Docker files RFC?
Oh, so this was actually supposed to precede that. It was inspired by some comments inside of the not merged yet support Docker files RFC. So hopefully it should just carry forward.
Yeah, that was a question for Steven. Like, what if the gen packages stuff? Like, should we just change that to conform to this one? This seems like a
yes. IO build packs base SBOM pointing to a file system layer that contains CNB SBOM becomes the new IO build packs SBOM in the Docker files RFC.
So that's the other question I had in this RFC. Like currently, I propose that we have some pack, like utility subcommand that allows you to create run images and tag the SBOM like diff ID to the label. But how would that work in the other one?
In the Dockerfile case, you run gen packages and it regenerates the SBOM location on disk, and then whatever is responsible for repackaging or for doing the build of the image should ideally ensure that file ends up in a separate layer that it continues to be referenced by the label and update the label.
Okay, and we also need to make sure so that in in the intermediate term where we don't have that support Docker files RFC, we do list out these constraints explicitly and have the tooling to do that. So like the SBOM should live in a separate layer in that location, and the label should point to a layer that just contains the SBOM.
And so this is all optional, right? If the stack maintainer wants to provide SBOM capabilities, but if they do, it has to be in this way.
Yep. So the only thing we need to make sure is that they're not doing something crazy where they're putting like a huge layer which contains things apart from the SBOM as in that label. So that's something we'll have to validate. I don't know where we'll validate that. But like if whatever was generating that label, in this case pack, like it would be easier if we just had like the Docker file or the Docker image that's already built with like as the run image currently is built in the like documentation, and then pack exposes like a pack SBOM attach command that takes in the container image tag, the location of the SBOM. I don't know where it should ideally be on the disk locally, so it can just attach that to the image as a separate layer, update it, create the label, and push it somewhere.
So it basically creating a base image becomes a two-step process for this, right? You create your container, or sorry, image, however you like, and then you have to run it through another process that adds the label.
Unless whatever process you're using to create the image allows you to figure out what the diff ID is and attach that as a label all in a single process. Which I don't know a lot of tools that provide that ability.
I mean, Hack could do it if it supports Docker files at some point, right?
If you're doing the operation using Conoco or something like that, right? Like or anything that generates a compressed blob before uploading it, you know.
Yeah.
It's just a Docker file specific restriction, right?
I don't know if Podman could do it, for example. Like Conoco Lifecycle are probably the only tools that, or like anything that uses Crane, for example, like, sorry, GGCR.
Yeah. But that doesn't mean that they have the functionality, right? We'd have to propose that they enable such functionality.
I mean, the only real restriction is that in a Docker file, you can't reference the, like compressed digest of a previous run instruction, right? If you could do that, there's not a real technical limitation. It's just the UX of that file.
Yeah, it would be cool if like on a multi-stage, you could do something like that.
You could potentially write an experiment, like a build kit front end to do that.
Yeah.
But not sure if you want to.
Can you do a multi-stage build kit build where you change the front end between the stages?
No, that's not.
Yeah, I didn't think so.
I mean, but being realistic, this sort of feature is really more targeted to enterprises that are going to have some sort of workflow, right? That are okay with having this two-step workflow. And it's not really like an end user centric feature where we need to provide a lot of tooling for it to make it as easy as possible.
But we should make it easy if there are no tools available. We should at least document how to do this with available tools, or have a tool that makes it easy.
Yeah, I agree with that. I guess maybe I was trying to say that it may not be worth trying to say like Dockerfile or build kit should have these sort of integrations, right? Or this sort of functionality.
Yeah.
But yeah, like a simple CLI tool or built into Pack, I think that makes sense.
We've talked about this for a while, like a Stackify, right? Some command that helps you create a stack, or now going to be base image, because there's metadata on there that's right, stacks go away. There's metadata on there that's non-obvious anyways, right? I think some of it you can add using Dockerfile, but like, I think it ties into that work. We should just make it really easy for whoever wants to create a stack using PackCLI.
Are we worried? The whole point of support Docker files was to, and remove stacks and mixins, right? Was to, make that whole process easier and, remove the abstraction around it. Are we worried about this two-step process, reintroducing some abstraction and complexity?
I guess the support Docker files one has a cleaner interface, right? Like you have that gen packages binary and whatever is creating those build and run images has to deal with that. Like it's still simpler than what we have in the middle, like this intermediate period where we don't have that RFC and we want to create some base image. I guess even when we have that RFC, when we want to create some base image, we would still need something like this.
I definitely don't want the support Docker files RFC to make it so that users feel like it's much easier to dynamically install packages at application build time versus create a stack that could be faster if they're going to use it for multiple apps. So like I very much agree that we should make it really easy to add a metadata and attach the SBOM or whatever when you're making a stack image, but it doesn't seem unreasonable to me that it's just one command you run after the Docker file. Hopefully that's not too bad, especially if it works against the daemon and it works against the registry.
All right. No, I'm with you all. It's just, it's one command now, but it could be two, right? And then soon enough, we'll have another stack versions 2 in the future. But okay, but as a problem, we don't have that problem right now. All right, I was just thinking out loud.
I am curious, as you brought that up, whether or not there are other alternatives. I can't come up with any, but maybe somebody else could. I just don't see how you would be able to create something dynamically and attach it after the fact.
Even if we kept putting the whole thing on a label, like it would have the same problem. And that I don't think in Docker you could run a command and then put the output of that command in as a label. I think labels have to be preset.
Static, yeah.
Yeah. Do we need the pack UX as part of the RFC, given that we don't have any standardization right now? I think Picado is going to pick their own or pick a label, go with it. Might be good to just standardize what it looks like to have an SBOM at all.
I wouldn't think so, right? Because I don't think it should be necessary for pack to be used in this sort of workflow. Like they should be able to do it with a two-step build Docker file build process.
Then we can. Sorry, go ahead.
Could we say that the SBOM layer has to be the last layer on the stack image?
Is there a reason it has to be last? Or what's the benefit?
That way you don't have to label it, right?
Yeah.
We want it to be optional though.
You can apply a label that, hey, I added an SBOM.
It seems risky because if we ever want people to be able to extend a stack image with a Docker file in the future, the resulting image would have the SBOM in the middle, and you'd have to move it to the end. And then you'd need special tooling to do the extension.
But if they're doing extensions, then that SBOM may not be valid anyway.
Mm.
That's interesting. Yeah.
I think the only thing is that labels carry over in OCI images, especially when you do a from whatever. So the problem is like you need to be able to invalidate that label that you're setting to identify that the SBOM is created when you add a new layer at the end. That's the only issue. Otherwise, that works perfectly.
You override. Sorry, go ahead.
No, go ahead.
If you override if you upload a new SBOM layer that has a new SBOM in it, and you just override the label to point at the new thing, even though you didn't delete the previous layer, if the file name is the same, it should work. Or like you just have to do the same operation again.
You just have to do, sorry, I didn't get you.
Like
if you,
I don't know if this helps exactly, but if you're appending layers, right, and then your old SBOM is in the middle, and then you run the same operation again of generate a new SBOM, put it at the bottom, and then point a label at the new one, because the file path is the same, at least the new one will override, so you don't have to deal with removing the old one, if that makes sense. So we don't, at least if you have vaguely, stack aware tooling, you might end up in the same place.
yeah, I'm
This is
just
the comment.
saying that if you don't add an SBOM, you appended a layer, you would need something to override that label to disable that SBOM was provided.
We could have a validation, checks to see if the SBOM layer isn't last, and then complains that additional layers have been added to the image. So like keep the same label, do everything in the RFC, but in PackUX, if you're doing something and it finds that the SBOM isn't last and there's other stuff after it, it could complain that this is maybe an invalid SBOM, right? It's like it could be a nice validation.
I think that would be in life cycle, but yes, I get your point.
I think that to me is cleaner and better supported by existing tooling that people already use to create these images.
I do want, so the last layer. So what if you're doing an operation that doesn't necessarily change anything that applies to SBOMs?
You delete a file.
Yeah, like a configuration file, right, of the application that's built in.
I definitely think it's safer to have both the label and try to make it last if we can do it.
I do think we open ourselves up to a lot of unhappy paths by putting it at the last and just trying to make sure in all cases that it feels I feel uneasy about it. So I did want to ask about time though. Yeah, I know we have other things on the docket. Do we want to punt on this?
I had one really logistical thing. Are we worried that the path for the run image would probably be the same as the path for the build image? And so if we ever wanted to carry the build image SBOM into the app directory, which I don't know if, I think we might want to put all the build time SBOMs in the final app image as well. And the path here should be like CNB SBOM run bomb something, or launch if that's the word we use in the other case. Probably run because run image. We might want to append something in there that makes the path run image specific. So if we ever wanted to pull the build image SBOM across as well, it wouldn't conflict.
Do we know that? Do we know we want to pull the build image SBOM?
We've talked about including build time SBOMs in the app image as an option. Like you can exclude them for reproducibility, or you can include them if you want the whole thing available in the final image. We could take it to GitHub if we feel like it's.
No, you're making sense. I just it's not necessary, right? Like if you have an app image with a run image on top as a base image, I'm just it's not necessary, right?
I think the path that's out here makes sense in the case that it is a run image, but once you move it to the final image, it's, I don't know. I don't have a very strong opinion about it.
You make sense anyway. No, you're right. You make sense anyway. I just don't know if people will actually be doing that in the real life, right? That was my question. But
like moving the
either
build
way,
across. Yeah.
Either way, it's safe and it's a safe thing to do anyway. I'm done.
Should we move on to the next thing? Is that right? 173. Which is mine. Support Docker files.
This was the POC stuff you want to talk about.
Right. So I think the main thing I wanted to go over for this is the kind of approach we take to implementing it, because I know Charles was looking into implementing this using like a combination of both user space and or like of non-user space, non-privileged-ish operations that like would require user namespacing or something like that. I wonder if it's better if we focus on two implementations first, and I wanted to get people's thoughts for which one we should prioritize. So the way I've thought about this is we could do one entirely user space implementation that doesn't require any user namespacing or anything, just like the build pack build using Conoco. And I think Sam, you had a question about that maybe, or somebody had a question about that. If we're doing static containers or creator, how would we do the run image? Was that somebody here?
I think it might have been. It could have been me at some point.
Yeah, I think that seems right. So I think we wouldn't be able to do a create. We would always be able to use static images, but we wouldn't be able to do a create or run without two containers. But you can do that in Tecton. You just start with a fixed run image and then apply the changes on top of it.
Why couldn't you do it with a single creator?
I mean, yeah. So like you might be able to do it with a single creator if you're willing to use Conoco to wipe out the whole builder at the end of the process and pull all the run image bits into the image and then extend it and then export those. That's another option too.
That's what Conoco currently does for multi-stage builds anyway, right? It just saves the artifacts and tars them, so you can just take the builder, save it somewhere in the workspace directory. I think Conoco puts it, then build the run image, put the builder back, continue on.
I was worried about like what happens to volumes, and also like if your builder is like 10 gigabytes or something, like does that, it's probably fine. You couldn't do it in parallel. It would be a little slower.
Yeah, I mean, if whatever builder, are we assuming that whatever extensions we're making to the build image are local only? They're not pushing them anywhere, or not creating an OCA image out of it?
I was imagining that they would still be cached. So like you'd use Conoco as a library to take a snapshot of the builder, apply the changes, and then take the layers that got generated and store those in a volume. At least in the life cycle, like if we're talking about the pure user space implementation, right? Like everything, this whole thing could happen, like, especially if we do that ACK at the end, the whole thing could happen in a single container, even though we're extending multiple images, because we could do that. The build image gets its extensions live, we cut the layers off, and then at the end of the build, once everything is ready, we wipe the whole builder image and replace it with the run image, and then run the runtime Docker files on top of it. I think we could really do it in one container. And so that implementation would be usable locally also. It just probably won't be as fast as if we use Docker files and to do the build.
I guess you could just, it's also in that weird state because right now if you use pack and creator, it's faster than running it in phases. But I guess in this case, it would be faster to run it in phases than to use the creator.
Or at least two phases, yeah.
I mean, I still like the fact that we could do it in a single container and binary, but
I think we should support that for Tecton, right? Sorry, Javier.
No, I was going to say, I think that makes a lot of sense from usability standpoint, right? To even if it's less performant or might have some slight complexities to it, there's a lot of value in just being able to execute one executable and the whole process works.
I don't know if it may be the more complex implementation. So like there's this user space implementation where we can do the whole thing without any namespacing using Conico, and I think I don't see any gaps there. Then there's this other Docker file based implementation that could also use creator in some contexts, where we would, every time a Docker file needs to get built, we would run out to the daemon, build a new image, and then the big interesting part of this implementation would be that it would change the image. The phases would be variable. So like the build pack build would start on an image that we did not know ahead of time. And so it's something Pack could implement, but it's not something that you could do in Tecton with access to a Docker daemon or something like that. But I think Pack should use that implementation because I think it'll be faster, the caching will be easier, things like that. And we can do the run image build in parallel, even in the creator case.
It gets more complicated because Pack also has untrusted builders, which run in the phase. Yeah, and like the individual phases as well. So like Pack won't always use the creator flow locally, but I guess it'll still be the same Docker based execution.
Yeah, if you're doing Docker files, the creator phase, if you're using the Docker daemon, is interesting because we'd want to do the build for the build time image between the detect and the build step or whatever. So and then it's just a couple other phases, right? Besides those. So like if you're doing a runtime Docker file, I don't know if the creator phase locally makes sense if we go with the daemon implementation, if that's faster than the other implementation.
Yeah, creator really throws a wrench in this because it really only works. It's kind of opposite. Like creator, I only really use locally today, like Pack sort of based, and we don't use creator in our like sort of tectonish sort of environment. But then it's almost going to be the reverse, where it'll be easier to run creator in a tecton environment. But if you have any extensions, you just won't be able to really use creator on the local, at least not performant.
Yeah. Anyways, that's all I wanted to bring up is if people had opinions about the kind of path forward there. I'm hoping we can talk to Charles when he gets back from vacation.
Can he make these working group things, or would that just be over Slack?
I think we moved them. We moved them to this time so that I think his time zone would be more reasonable, but maybe he has a conflict. I don't think he's shown up before.
Is there any place where we are like documenting the current progress of the implementation or any discussions that take place?
It's been pinging in Slack, and also the actual PR itself has some comments on it, as well as the actual lifecycle issue. He's been updating all of those, I believe.
For the Slack stuff, would it make sense to direct these conversations to a public channel?
I think these are in a public Slack channel.
Yeah, I think I've seen some in implementation, right?
Yeah. Yeah, they have. That's where he's been doing it.
But I don't think it gives you like a real overview, right? It's just more stuff that gets thrown in there for questions and stuff like that.
I unfortunately have to leave a little bit early. Can I assign somebody else the to run through the agenda?
Sure, I'll do it.
Thanks.
All right, peace out. Thanks for hosting. We done with that? We done with, is there anything else to say on any last comments about the different POC options for support Docker files? All right, it's all good. Moving on, we have project descriptor usage discussion. Javier, was it you that brought this one up?
I actually think it was Steven. It just left.
Yeah, I was gonna say not me. I think it was Steven. But I could, given our audience here, let me see real quick. I know the question Joe, you might have been absent on yesterday's conversation, but basically from his standpoint, I think it was the idea on whether or not we really wanted to go with this build pack centric configuration file as opposed to the project descriptor as like to encompass more than just build packs, right? And kind of bringing that to the community here instead of just on the core team.
Yeah, I think the discussion I remember a couple weeks ago was also included partial versus complete support. Like I think there's two questions around the project descriptor. One is it, is a platform expected to 100% support it, or is it acceptable to partially support it? And then the second is sort of a cosmetic experience part of whether we continue with this being a more generic project descriptor, or if we try to make it more pack native. Well, then there's a whole, beyond that, there's a whole set of questions. Do we make it a pack specific configuration? Do we make it a CNB thing that lifecycle is aware of, and that kind of stuff. We have a lot of thoughts, but
Does the
I'll pause there.
RC that Natalie's helping with already, the fact that we're pulling it into platform? I mean, not the file directly.
Well,
but the order
it
kind of
does.
bleeds.
Yeah, it does,
Is that
but I think
last
there's still
question
some
you had?
questions. Yeah, I think it does start that. It's sort of a forcing function that we need to answer that, but like as it exists today, I don't think lifecycle can be sort of fully aware, right? There are things in project descriptor that lifecycle that need to be addressed at the platform level, I think. So Natalie's RC is like a conversion process, right? So I think it is slightly different for it to be aware in the sense that there's some tooling that it can use to convert into a format that it expects. But that's not exactly the same as it being integral to the life cycle.
What parts do you see being necessary for the lifecycle to consume from, the project descriptor?
I'm not sure on a personal level care. The things I'm doing are largely the things that I'm working on, and outside of the project, I largely care about pack using it, right? I think, gosh, I forget what the original motivation was for some of this. I mean, I think it may have been just to get things out of pack that were not specific to pack, and move them. But I can't remember. I don't know, Natalie, if you remember what some of the things that we were wanting to get out of Project TOML and into lifecycle, so to speak.
I feel like that was an Emily discussion, but
Yeah,
Like part of it might have been like downloading build packs, because there's a lot of complexity in how pack understands the different variations of build pack references, and things like that.
yeah. That sounds like definitely one of the things where there's like a parser for the URL and then an understanding of how to resolve that.
Yeah. I don't know that I would say that that's a life cycle concern, although it very well could be. I think that's like a pretty hard discussion to have of exactly how we want to do that. Because, if you think about it, it doesn't necessarily depend on the project descriptor, right? If somehow we could pass build pack URIs to the lifecycle in some other format, configuration file, or anything like that, it could still have that sort of functionality. I think what makes sense right now is like, let's say environment variables, right? The platform right now is all it's having to do is do like a pass through of the environment variables. And so in that case, we're having to take something from a config file and put them into the platform M directory. So that's a sort of process that seems almost mundane, and the lifecycle could do it on its own or consume that file on its own. But I'm not convinced that that is one of the primary objectives of I guess, the way that I see this configuration file working, or at least some of the questions that are currently on the table. So for me, I wrote down the 3 questions, right? Cosmetics, whether it's required for the platforms, and whether this is a pack config or a lifecycle config or something in between. So the cosmetics, I think we could talk about that in depth. But for the required for platforms, I think that's something that I really strongly want to advocate for, right? Is the idea that this configuration file should be understood by platforms so that we could carry the user experience and user expectations across all the different platforms that support build packs. I think, to me, that's fairly critical.
I feel like we were advocating for that, but then was it Tecton? I think it was Tecton. We couldn't figure out a way to make it work nice with Tecton, or easily, I guess.
Yeah, and that's another part of the motivation for the lifecycle converter thing, is that a platform like Tecton could pre-process, like in a single stage, pre-process the project toml into, because I know Emily was very adamant that like the lifecycle should not be aware of the project toml schema and all that, but it could take some other like intermediate language as input or intermediate format as input, and so that preprocessor would convert it into whatever other toml files needed to exist on the system for a Tecton-like platform to consume.
Yeah, so I think there's like a back end to the configuration file, and there's a front end, right? So the front end is the piece that, again, I care for the platforms being able to support for the user's sake. And so when we talk about Tecton specifically, the way I envision it is we would make use of the converter in Tecton and say, this is the user provided configuration project descriptor. Give me something I understand, right? And let's say it's build packs in there. I could then download these build packs into very specific locations within Tecton. So I do think that that sort of platform is solved through what we're trying to achieve in this scenario.
So maybe it would help to get, like, we're talking about a bunch of different problems. Maybe it would help to get really crisp about like the problem we're trying to solve without, with sort of being value neutral on the possible solutions. I think one is a user experience problem, and I think that ties into what Javier, what you're saying about multiple platforms like that. I feel like that's an experience problem, right? And maybe tied into that is that not all platforms may be capable of supporting all features. Like builders, for example, some platforms may not want to or be able to allow custom builders. I don't think we have builders in the project toml, but we bring it up because it's something that potentially could be in there. Not sure if that's a developer experience problem, but it definitely is a problem in terms of defining how support for project descriptor works.
Yeah, I think if you think about the project descriptor as, and basically just the whole build pack system as an alternative to Docker files, and Docker files have a backend and the front end, right? The front end is the file that you write, and the backend is the execution of these steps. And in my mind, the project descriptor is the format for, similar to that Docker file. And then the platforms, the backend, the lifecycle execution is again just that backend piece. And when I take this configuration file and I give it to a different platform, right, I expect the same outcome, similar to when you take a Docker file and you run it through Conoco versus you run it through Docker or Podman, right? Like all these should yield the same result, theoretically, or at least that should be the goal. I understand that certain platforms may not want to support certain features. And I believe we've resolved that already through, something that we're proposing on the conversion process. Is something that allows you to either error out or warn for certain things that might be ignored or not supported. And that's something that platforms could opt in to leverage as well. So we could do that, but again, the ultimate goal is if you have two platforms and they both want to support everything that the project descriptor entails, then it should be really easy to do so instead of having to duplicate the logic and feature set on each individual platform.
Okay, so that's the impetus for pushing much of the functionality to the lifecycle. Is that? I'm just trying to be clear there.
Yeah, I mean, I think that could be something for pushing into the lifecycle. I think for me right now, I'm barely at the step of, hey, right now it's the project descriptor is an extension spec, which by its nature says that most platforms could just simply ignore it. And I'd want to bring it into the fold and say that you should not ignore the project descriptor, right? Like platforms cannot ignore the project descriptor file. They have to do something. They have to tell the user, hey, we don't support these features, or or just do it, right? And then we can make it easier for the platforms if we push into the lifecycle, but that's like, next steps. Like right now, I think we're still at the point where we're discussing whether or not we want to bring the project descriptor into a required set of the spec.
Any hot takes on that?
I mean, what does that mean for something like App Engine, Google App Engine, where a platform may, to have it required, a platform may not necessarily, like build packs are an implementation detail of a particular platform. Does that mean that they're not a platform? Like we're like, meaning it's implementation detail where we're not going to document Project TOML. We're not going to honor Project TOML. We're not going to allow you to customize your build packs, like nothing, really strict platform. Is that a platform? Are we saying that's not a platform if we're saying that you have to support Project TOML or some variation of it?
I mean, that is a good question, right? So I'll throw a different one, right? Like Scaffold, right? Scaffold to me is a platform because it itself has a configuration, but your application could, theoretically have the project descriptor, and then it is passed along to Pack because they use Pack internally, and it would support other features as you'd expect from an end user's perspective, right? What was it? Cloud Run, App Engine? Which one did you bring up right now? The one that just
App Engine. I think Cloud Run. I don't think it supports Project TOML, but I could see it supporting Project TOML. But App Engine, that seems like it doesn't seem like it would make sense for it to do that. They might have their own configuration format or whatever.
Yeah, that is interesting. if they essentially leverage the build pack technology, but they don't expose any of the configuration to the end user, yeah, I think that's I would maybe side on the argument that they're not really a platform.
It's
It's kind of weird.
Yeah, there's also like Waypoint, right? Which is like the hashy thing, which I guess is similar to maybe the scaffold use case, which is they have their own config thing, and their users probably may not know about all these things. I guess they use pack, so technically they probably just support it out of the box.
Yeah, so I think ultimately it goes to the idea of, can you select a builder or set of build packs as part of the build process? Because in doing so, you need to then be able to provide environment variables, right, to configure the build packs and the functionality of the build packs. I think that's at the point where I would, at least in this mindset, I would define that being a platform.
So I would say we're coming close to time, so maybe we should talk about some like concrete next steps. Like I feel like we maybe need a straw man, because there's a lot of different aspects to this that we're batting around, and actually I think multiple problems that we're trying to discuss. It doesn't have to be like an RFC, but I think it would help to have like a one pager kind of thing on the problem and what somebody's proposing, even if you aren't 100% sure about it.
Yeah.
And I might take a stab at that if I get a chance, but
yeah, I think the redeclaration of what a platform is a really good question that came up that I hadn't thought about. So I do appreciate that at least.
Cool. Any other I mean, getting through 5 topics was sort of ambitious for any working group. Any last comments on this one? Project descriptor, questions? Okay. I appreciate the discussion. With the power vested in me, I'm gonna call it. Give you a couple minutes back. All right. See you in the next one.